think about beginning anyway. My name is Sandy Baird. I'm on the board of the Caroline Fund, and I want to just say a few words about the fund for all of you who might be interested in applying or getting involved in our work. We're a fund that is established to help women in need, women in trouble, brave women like Lynne Stewart. And so we can be reached at 865-6932, or also through me, 862-2001. With that, we're very pleased tonight to present to you a very brave woman, in my view. And that is Lynne Stewart. She is being brought to you by the Caroline Fund and also by the National Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. We have a member of that group here who was good enough to endorse Lynne's visit to Vermont. That's Brad Stetler, an attorney here in town, and I really thank you for that endorsement. Lynne Stewart, and the reason that we brought Lynne to town is to educate the public about her case, a very important case for all Americans. We believe that her civil liberties and her right to be a lawyer is under attack right now by the government, and we think that as we said in our brochure, the violence to the civil liberties of one person is the violence to the civil liberties of all of us. And for that reason, we brought Lynne here to talk about her case, to inform the public about her case, and to also ask for your support for her very important work. Anyway, I'm going to also ask Roz Payne to say a few words, because Roz has been involved in this kind of work, criminal defense work, for what we would sometimes say are unpopular clients for a very long period of time. So here's Roz, my comrade.
I'm going to not say very much because I just heard Lynne speak for the last period of time, and she's got so much to say that's so much more important, and I had a whole introduction written out. And since Sandy gave you such a good introduction, I'm going to let you almost speak to you for yourself. She's got great stories. I actually heard some today, and we got to remember as you're listening to her that she may be facing up to 40 years supposedly in prison for having conversations with a client which were taped and then later doing a press conference. And she's, throughout the ages, she's defended all sorts of unpopular cases. Maybe she could go through also a list to tell you a little of her history ahead of time. And we have a donation basket in the back with that yellow piece of paper right above the food. If people could donate money as you're leaving towards her defense, which her bail alone, I understand, is like $500,000. So,
but see, as a good lawyer, I have to interrupt and say, it is, but it's sort of a promissory thing. If I don't show up, my children are going to be responsible, so they're making sure I stay on.
So anyways, here's Lynne to speak to you. And also, people in the back, there's really room up here. You can come sit down on the rug in the front if you'd like. And there's 3 chairs right here. So, yeah.
About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I guess, the New York Times did a piece about me, which featured a lone woman in the middle of her living room reading a book, and the title of this piece was Left Behind. And in the tenor of the piece was sort of this very nice lady who's so obviously guilty is left behind from the 60s, and no one is supporting her. Take a look around.
Not true.
I have been the beneficiary since the morning of my arrest with the most amazing support, coast to coast, old friends coming out, a fellow that we knew from the 60s in Newark, a Black Panther, called up on Monday with tears because we had lost touch with each other. His daughter had brought him the magazine, and he wanted to be part of what was going on. As I've said in many other occasions, you know, I ought to stand up. I'm not a sit down. I'm a lawyer. We talk on our feet, you know. So, and then I can see everybody too. didn't ask John Ashcroft to do this to me, but if he's going to make me his poster child for his war on terror and his dismantling of the Constitution, I'm going to accept that nomination. I am going to defend it. We were confronted on April 9th, coming home. We're actually leaving the house to go to work. I heard some commotion on my front steps. We live in a little house in Brooklyn, not the townhouse of the New York Times, sort of a two-story brick with a couple of bodegas on each corner and a real neighborhood, New York style, Brooklyn style, I guess I should say. And I heard my husband Ralph, who's sitting here in the front row, engaged in a sort of an altercation on the front steps. And I'm upstairs, I come down and I look out the door, and after 25 years as a defense lawyer, I'm immediately able to make these guys as law enforcement. They had suits, but there's something about the way they carry themselves. So I could hear Ralph saying, well, if you have a warrant, you better show it to me, and I don't see any badges. And so I stepped out on the front stoop, and I said, Ralph, take it easy, take it easy. I said, you know, we'll call the office, we'll take care of everything, just don't create another ruckus, just go along with them and it'll be okay. They looked up the FBI agent, he pointed, he says, we're not here for him, we're here for you. Well, I was astounded. My good partner here is always a little rambunctious and ruffling feathers and getting in people's faces for righteous causes, so I assumed this is to be his doing. Little did I know that at the very moment they were putting the handcuffs on me, and of course they were very kind, they handcuffed the 62-year-old grandmother in front rather than behind my back, and of course told me how kind they were being to me, that John Ashcroft was winging his way to New York, where he held a press conference in the very shadow of the World Trade Center, telling everybody how the war on terrorism was arresting me, arresting my interpreter, and arresting my paralegal for conspiring to aid a terrorist organization and conspiracy to aid a terrorist organization, and also a crime which is best explained by lying to the government. Without going into all those details, I just have to say that to show that this was somewhat a Showtime thing for Ashcroft, which indeed a lot of people, even in his own party, are feeling he does a lot of. He also that night went on the Letterman show, which is probably more widely carried than a press conference in the Southern District. And on the Letterman show, he sang his song about the soaring eagles that he has written, talk about bad taste, and he also told them how I had been arrested and the world was once again safe. Letterman led the applause, and I have written to Letterman, and I'm asking for equal time because I think I can get them to applaud me too. Notwithstanding all of that, it was Showtime for this administration, and someone asked me this question, which I still haven't quite got an answer for, whether or not I thought it was calculated at a certain time to cover up something else they were doing, because this administration seems to have a genius for that. But I tend to think in my view in any way, their entire war on terrorism, which I really think is a war on the Constitution, is calculated to prey upon the fears that we all legitimately may fear, but is to prey upon our fears and allow us to become the enemy we despise. I don't think that it's unlike one of my colleagues who teaches at Yale, teaches at Harvard, Dershowitz. I don't think torture is ever justified. I don't care who is doing what to you. I don't think torture is a way that shows a way out. I don't think that the suspension of the rights of people who are incarcerated, no matter what characterization you give their crime, is the way out. But this is really not a case about me, my political background, although I think it played some role in their electing to arrest me. I do have a long history of representing political people. I started out my political representation after being a librarian in a public school in Harlem and on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I went back to law school in '71, sort of a golden time when the law schools first took in over 50% women. I was fortunate enough to be at Rutgers, where the famous constitutional lawyer Arthur Kanoy, a small gnome of a man with a very large tie and a not a prepossessing voice, but when the man spoke, you listened and you became inspired. And I have seen him before the United States Supreme Court, where they just sat there like a kindergarten class, listening to every word he said. So I was lucky enough to be inspired by this great constitutional scholar and opened my own practice in New York in the late '70s, where, as I just said on the program here, I did all kinds of law, divorces, wills, represented claimants on insurance, bought and sold Chinese restaurants down on Mott Street, just a little bit of everything. But criminal defense was my first love, because in my own view, wedded in the '60s, it was the one place where you were really talking about people's freedom. It was the state against an individual. Your only duty was to defend as strongly as you could within the bounds of ethics. And I tell you here tonight, I know that line very well. I have represented hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal defendants accused of all manner of crime. I defended people for illegally attending a PTA meeting. I had defended people for, we're laughing about that, for murder. I have not done a death penalty case, although I'm on the panel to do them, but I have gone from the bottom to the very top. And in every case, I know where the line is. I have never crossed the line, and that is the gravamen of the government's indictment, that somehow or other I became part of my client's political life in a sense that was not acceptable to the government. So to carry on with what I was doing, I have always represented political people. One of my closest political clients, because I do believe that a lawyer's job is to be vigorous, to conduct trials, but then once the trial is over, not to say, well, write to me from jail, I'll see you, but to go on representing. And this is particularly true of people who are incarcerated around a politic, because they have a need that is different, perhaps, from the ordinary person who is incarcerated. They are a target of the government because they have elected to live their life in that way. They are in many ways abused in jail unless there is someone that becomes their watchdog that indeed speaks up for them. So starting in the '80s, I represented people who were in demonstrations against the Springbok rugby team of South Africa. I represented Black Panthers. I represented David Gilbert, who was a Weather Underground, in the case with Kathy Boudin and some Black Liberation Army people. I represented the United Freedom Front, one of whose members, son and daughter and wife, lived here in Vermont during a time when the New Jersey State Police thought nothing of overrunning a campground made by a mother and her two small children because they believed that the father had come to join them in the Vermont woods, and terrorizing the children and the mother. That's Nadahe Stoddard, who I'm happy to say has grown up to give them back more than they ever gave him. His father became my client in 1984. I defended him through 3 trials. He was part of a famous sedition case in Springfield, Massachusetts, and he is serving what is essentially a life sentence in the federal system. He has, Richard Williams this is, has been locked down since September 11th. He is a homegrown revolutionary with a tendency toward anarchism, would you say?
Me more than him, definitely.
Oh, you more than him. Yeah, well, I agree with that. But he has been what he is, but he has been locked down. Now, what does that mean, locked down? Well, in prison, you're always locked down, of course, but then there's an upping of that when they place you in an even smaller cell. I believe he told me, and my most recent cell right now is approximately 3 feet wide and 10 feet long, with a, oh no, I take it back. The window in the door, which is the only access he has to the outside, is 3 inches by 10 inches. He is never allowed out of the cell without 3 guards, one of whom has his hand on his arm at all times. There is also a video camera on him at all times. Most recently, they decided that it was too dangerous for them to get books from the outside. This is he and 3 Muslims who are in Lompoc, California. And so they have to get books from the library wagon, which sometimes comes once a week, sometimes comes once every 2 weeks. And then they can only get 1 book at a time. Before that, they were able to have books sent in from the outside, and as I always say, to show you my closest to Richard, I sent him the Times crossword puzzle every Sunday, because that is where he is intellectually. This is what he likes to do. He reads books about carving small sailing ships. He's a great fan of Patrick O'Brien. And he is now in this terrible situation for which we are mounting a conditions lawsuit. There are other political prisoners. There are people from the United Freedom Front that are incarcerated in Massachusetts. There is Tommy Manning, who, and this is part of when you don't have a lawyer that is really right on the case. And we did work on Tommy's case, but even when you do have a lawyer, things go wrong. He had a knee replacement and hip replacement done, and after it was done, oops, the Bureau of Prison made one leg shorter than the other. To which they replied, well, that's okay, because you're going to have the other one done sometime, and then we'll even them up. It's almost medieval. But the work of defending political prisoners, as my point, is not just end when you say, okay, you know, I'll give your mother your address or something like that. It goes on because people in jail are more powerless, are more vulnerable, and need representation. And I have always tried my best to give them that representation throughout their entire prison experience, I guess you would call it. We, of course, ended the 80s as just about everybody else did. There was not much politics around. And so in the 90s, what surfaced was a new, I guess I would say, a new intended victim of the imperial might of America, and that is Middle Easterners. So all leftists turned their attention to this. And I think that we're not talking here about defending people's religion or customs or way of life, but defending people who are confronted by a massive demonization of themselves and their lifestyle and their religion. So that when Ramsey Clark came to me in '95 and asked me, '94 actually, October, and asked me if I would represent the Sheikh, he was pro se at the time. He had previously been represented by Bill Kunstler, my dear friend, with whom I tried many cases, including Richard Williams twice, and who had signed on to the case very early, but had signed on for too many defendants. And in the law, you can only represent one defendant in a case, or you have a conflict of interest. It is a very tough law, but a fair law, because the notion is that if you've interviewed one person, you might have learned something that would work to the detriment of that person when you're defending person number 2. So Bill and Kubi were thrown off the World Trade Center 2 case. Now, the original World Trade Center, the Sheikh Omar, who I was asked to go visit, had nothing, was never indicted, although he is always referred to by the press as the person who was convicted for the World Trade Center. That is simply not true. This was a government case where an agent by the name of Imad Salem, who was a double agent for the Egyptian government and who was paid with $1 million check, basically organized a cell in a mosque and then rented a safe house, bought materials, which the government later admitted would never have blown up anything, and then instigated, including the sheikh, whom he asked for advice. And it was for giving advice to this person that he ultimately was convicted, and he is now serving a life sentence. But that is not what we are here about, because what we are here about is not the sheikh and the sheikh's case, although the journalists like to make it be about that. What we are here about is me and about lawyers. My oldest stepson, who was doing a documentary, said, okay, so your message is, let me get it right, this could happen to anyone, anytime. I said, well, that's sort of half the message. The message is, this could happen to anyone, anytime, but the problem is, if they convict me, there'll be no lawyers to call. That's the rub, because in indicting me for doing what lawyers do, they are in fact sending a message throughout the bar that you better not get involved with this kind of a client, you better not operate with him the way you do with your other clients, you don't want to have your practice diminish, because I can tell you very honestly that the same time those cuffs went on me in front of my house in Brooklyn, the FBI descended on my office. They carried out box loads of files, papers, and at the end of the day, after they had been there for about 12 hours, they downloaded all the hard drives on all the computers. They seized the Rolodex index, you know, the little cards that have all the client's name, and as I said, maybe more sensitive than anything else because it might have the wife's name and the girlfriend's name on there. And also all the experts we use, all our contacts, all the lawyers we talk to, they took both of those, my own little personal address book in my drawer. They conducted this search and then were photographed very prominently, and those pictures were put in the next day's tabloids of the FBI carrying these box loads of material out of my office. Not good for a defense lawyer. Not the kind of thing someone thinking about hiring you wants to see. They want their secrets to be safe with you, because we, of course, as lawyers, are enjoined to keep the secrets of our clients. We're like, sometimes I hesitate to make this analogy in the current climate, but we are like priests in the confessional, that we are bound to keep the confidences of our clients. And the client may rely upon that. And that is the way we work. The client has got to feel free to tell us everything. Because if we don't know everything, we really can't defend. And I use this example, it may be a little homey or smarmy, but I think it works. I always say, imagine that Joe is accused of I think it's a DUI in Vermont. In New York, it's a DWI, driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence. And Joe comes to your office and Joe says, you know, Miss Stewart, I just want you to know, I did drink about 4 or 5 beers at the tavern over on Main Street before I got in my car. But I can really hold my liquor. I really wasn't drunk after I got into the car. And they took me to the precinct, and they had me, you know, walk the line and walk backwards and touch my nose and do all their things. And, you know, I passed all those tests, but the cops wrote down that I failed them. But my friend Joe, he works at the precinct, and he saw all this. And my friend Joe is willing to come forward and be my witness and say that I didn't fail these tests. Now, that's a very nice case for a lawyer, but it's not a very nice case if the government is listening to the conversation, because they now know that, number one, you were drinking, and they know where, and they know where to go to get a witness to say you drank and how much you drank. They also have the wherewithal to perhaps lean a little on Joe. Joe, you like working in this place? You have a good job here? You sure, is that what you saw that night? So it undercuts the entire process, and heaven knows the criminal justice system has enough warts on it, enough problems that we contend with every day, those of us who labor in that particular field, that to take away the attorney-client privilege is to really undermine the entire process. And this is essentially what the government did in my case, because what they did was, the case had its genesis, first of all, we know from internal, I guess you'd call it straight out gossip in the U.S. Attorney's Office, that they were not happy with me and Ramsey Clark and Abdeen Jabara, because we sort of didn't really pay attention to these special administrative regulations or measures that had been placed on the sheikh. He was a person who they had targeted as being someone that was dangerous, and they had then placed on him almost a total restriction. No visitors. The only 2 phone calls he could make was to his lawyers and to his wife in Egypt. That call was once a month. Our calls were once a week. He could not attend services, religious services. And most lawyers will tell you that's the one place where the jails don't go usually. They will give everybody religious services, but not him. He was required to stay in his cell. He was, of course, locked down. He was not permitted to have a radio that could receive anything in Arabic. Of course, in Rochester, Minnesota, you may say, well, what could he ever hear? But the fact of the matter is, Rochester, having the Mayo Clinic, also has a great many of the secular leaders of the Middle East flying in their private jets for medical treatment. So the King of Saudi Arabia may well listen to the Arabic channel, but the sheikh was not permitted to. As a bottom line, in May of 2000, 2 years before my indictment, the sheikh asked me to make a press release on his behalf involving the situation as he perceived it in Egypt. I did so because I felt, and I still believe, that he had First Amendment rights and I have First Amendment rights, and those rights trump prison regulations. After that, the government, seemingly in good faith, engaged my attorney in a 6-month dialogue, ending up with us re-signing the agreement to abide by the special administrative measures, and I would be permitted to visit and take phone calls. Unbeknownst to us, the government did not act in good faith. They were busy setting up their cameras, their tape recorders, and every visit and every phone call was taped, video and oral, from that moment on. And what did they get for all this trouble? Nothing, almost nothing. One of the conversations they used as the basis, which had something to do with his health and falsely reporting on his health, Michael Tiger, my lawyer, informs me, is a complete misreading. One of those things where if you take a line out of context, it seems to say the sheikh is not getting his insulin, and that's not true. But if you keep reading, says, well, we can't say that. We don't know whether he's getting it or not. We can't be caught in a lie, because if we're caught in a lie, nobody will ever believe us. That's the one thing you have when you defend political people, is the truth. You tell the truth, because that is the bulwark between them and the community, the only thing that really saves them. So that was another allegation. There was one about which Ashcroft liked particularly. I think his mind works in certain ways, but he certainly commented on the that I somehow or other distracted the guards. 40 years ago, my dear, I may have distracted those guards, but it was the method we had of working using an interpreter is very cumbersome. I'm not going to belabor the entire situation, but it was a method by which we reviewed materials ahead of time before we went in the jail. We usually had a 2-day visit. The visit was from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. Using an interpreter in the traditional way meant I would speak, he would speak, the sheikh would speak, he would speak, I would speak, I would listen, I would speak again. It was extremely cumbersome. So basically what we did was we took our materials in advance, went over them, decided what we were going to say. This was this. What about this? We had a letter from so-and-so. What about the conditions campaign? Are we going to go into it? Do we want to, you know, the questions we had, and those would be discussed between him and the interpreter in Arabic. That night, we would go back to the motel. We would work for 4 or 5 hours going through his answers. The following day, we would return to the jail, and we would have a dialogue over anything I didn't understand, under any further questions he might have, I might have. But during the time that we're doing this one-on-one thing, it looks like only the interpreter is talking. So the last thing you want on a prison visit, especially one that you've traveled 1,500 miles to have, is to have the guards coming in and saying, okay, this doesn't look right to me, everybody out. So when we were paid attention, and in this particular instance, they completely turned around and were watching every move we made. Now, I noticed this, obviously, and said, let's have a 3-way conversation. And we did have a 3-way conversation, and in about 10 minutes, they then turned around again and stopped listening to us. So the distracting the guards may be true, but to what end? They have the tape of what the conversation was before, the tape of what the conversation was after. If it had been anything other than your oldest daughter wants to get married, and your uncle wants to know whether she should do this, if you have any advice about this, what about the dowry for so-and-so? I have a question from one of your parishioners who wants your advice on a matter, a personal matter. We read the newspaper to him endlessly because he had no opportunity to find out about the news. And you must remember in all of this, and people always say I talk too much about the sheikh, I should talk more about myself, but this was a man who had been on the world stage. He was respected by hundreds of thousands of people. The reason Ramsey Clark came to me was because he believed we could not betray the people who believed in the American left, in the forward-thinking people in this country, and allow the sheikh to be pro se on trial. So he was a person who did deserve to be heard, and indeed was heard. Would you please turn off all self? Anyway.
Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
When did they start taping your conversations?
It was in February of 2001. We had a visit out there then. The phone conversations, they told us in court yesterday there were 73 phone conversations. We figure if there's one phone call a week, 52 weeks in the year, so it's about a year and maybe a month or so afterwards. There was no phone communication because I had no phones in my office after 911, and Ramsey Clark was not allowed in his office after 911 because they closed down all of the bottom of Manhattan. So there's a month maybe missing there, but we assume it's about a year's worth of phone calls. We are engaged in a prosecution in which there were FISA wiretaps. Most folks don't know about FISA, but it was a law that was passed in the early 90s. It was supposed to be only used by direction of Congress on sort of the basement peeping. You know, the basement of the Libyan embassy. We'll put a bug and we'll listen to everything they're saying. It was not supposed to be used for criminal prosecutions, but it's such a nifty little thing. All the FBI agent does is walk upstairs in the Justice Department, and there's the FISA judge right there. He hands in his application, it's stamped, he gets the best wiretap ever. 24/7. Nobody ever needs to be notified. It's not minimized, which lawyers understand is when they turn off the machine because you're talking to your doctor, your psychiatrist, your priest, your lawyer. It is a wiretap that is supposed to be for foreign intelligence, but it has been used increasingly in criminal prosecutions. And recently, the FISA court, a very conservative group of federal judges who have never been known to turn down an application, although they have sent a few back, reported to your good Senator Leahy here that the FISA court had been misled on at least 75 occasions by the FBI. They have been misled not only as to the facts in cases, but also by reason of not separating the wiretap from criminal prosecutions. In other words, the same prosecutor was using the wiretap that was prosecuting certain cases. So this was, in our case, a FISA, a foreign intelligence surveillance wiretap. I'm not to make too big a thing. They did not tap my phone, but they did tap my conversations with my interpreter and with my paralegal, both of whom are Egyptians. There will be no evidence produced that we operated in any way differently than any other legal team defending anybody. This was a calculated effort by the government to fuel up their Patriot Act, in the sense that we need a little gas in the engine. We need to think, here we have been running around for, at that point, 7 months and no bin Laden. We have been, the only people we have under arrest is Massasoit, who apparently has gone completely mad in jail. We only have John Walker Lind, who at that time was an American, caught in Afghanistan. We had, more recently, I think that came slightly after my arrest, the young man Padilla. About none of us know anything about this case, because of course he was hustled off, locked up, the key thrown away, and our brilliant and wonderful Secretary of Defense announced that, oh, we'll let him out when he talks to us. Which sounds very reminiscent of those old Gestapo films I used to watch when I was a kid in the 40s. We will let you out when you talk to us, meaning we'll torture you until that time, and when you talk to us, then you may be let go, a destroyed person. Nobody knows what's happening to him. He has no counsel. He is in a jail somewhere in Virginia. He is an American citizen. They have never presented any of the evidence against him. And, he has not been charged. He is, and then there is another American citizen also captured in Afghanistan, born in America, not to mention the people on Guantanamo, not to mention the detainees who are still left in there. And just to point out the perniciousness of this type of prosecution, I think, Bill Goodman of the Center for Constitutional Rights, which has defended people over the years, everyone from the freedom marches of the 60s right up to the present. He was interviewed by BBC, and he said, as a lawyer, you do have to start thinking about it. He said, I'm the one that brought the writ to get the detainees out. What if the government says, oh, detainee 1113, he's really a part of Hamas, Therefore, you are aiding a terrorist organization by getting him out of jail. Now we'll indict you too. This has been a sad history in the Western world that dictatorships do arrest the lawyers because we are a bother. We are pesty. We get in court and we do things. We make the Vermont welfare system pay back the mothers the support money. Which I was just informed about today. We do things that upsets the grinding on of the government wheels. We defend people because we know that if everyone doesn't get a good defense, then none of us will. There was a saying in the 60s, you know, all of us or none of us. I still believe in that. And that is one of the reasons why I defend and why I am seeking support. I think that talking to people and being forthright. When I was taken to court that first day, I said I was emphatically not guilty. I was so outraged that they had brought this case, that I was charged, that the smear was on. And I, against the advice of counsel, rushed over to the microphones there assembled and basically said things. It was kind of a time when I'm not remembering. What I do remember is that the following morning, every newspaper in New York and all over the country had more to say about the way I was dressed and the state of my hair than they did about the issues. Frumpy, dowdy, rumpled, stringy hair. And I said, they don't talk about the boys that way. That doesn't matter what they look like on an occasion like this. So I knew right away I had a great deal of support from the women who sometimes look frumpy or dowdy or... And just to close on, I think and I hope that John Ashcroft underestimated what he was getting himself into. Yeah. And I think and I believe that the New York Times ran the Left Behind article in an effort to stop the just amazing support that I have received. Just, you know, you usually have to die to find out how many people love you. I'm alive, and the outpouring has just really been remarkable and heartwarming. And I just want everyone here to know that you have nothing to fear from me by supporting me. I can't talk about those guys in Washington. Thank you. You're not supposed to stand up. Thank you.
Some questions, so if people could sit down, and there's a microphone right up here.
You think
So,
it's stay in our seats?
oh, never mind, you can stay in your, ask your question from wherever.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
Can you tell me, has there been a notable difference in, as far as the lawyers defending people? I mean, have you seen a difference in people's ability to get a good defense since September 11th, or since this happened to you?
I have talked to a lot of people about it. They will admit to me that they think twice before taking a case because they say, I don't want to have to make two decisions, what's best for the client and then what's best for me. It's not supposed to be part of the equation. Whether anybody has actually turned down an assignment from a court or not, but it's out there, you know, and there's got to be. I did meet an old friend up in the Bronx on the steps of the concourse, and he said to me, he said, you know, I'm not doing, I always thought I wanted to do at least one big high-profile case in my life. He said, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm just going to do the nice little cases that come my way, not raise any issues, not raise any questions. So I sort of patted him on the shoulder. I said, come on, you don't really mean that. But I think maybe he did. And that, I think, is the danger.
The other question is, when I saw you in St. Johnsbury a while back, you were talking about how the prisons are full of people in this country who have been just picked up and thrown in prison. They don't have any defense. They're somewhat suspicious. But nobody's defending
Well,
them,
this
all
is-
their families don't know where they are and whatnot, is that?
Apparently, a lot of these, they are mostly Muslim men that were arrested after 9/11. They were in various parts of the country. It is only the courts that have come to their defense by demanding open courtrooms in certain cases. A great many of them have agreed to deportation because the conditions under which they were held were so onerous. I think the number, as far as we know, and of course this is secret, we don't know. They won't tell us, and the judges who have forced them have been piecemeal because they'll say, in my district you must reveal the names, addresses, but that hasn't happened everywhere. So we understand, and this is from the people who are doing this work in terms of trying to get them out by writ or whatever, that there are approximately 200 to 400 still remaining in custody, held without charge, held without lawyer, held without notification, basically, while they go through whatever process it is the government has decided to put them through. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Has there been a legal challenge to the conditions that you were required to sign?
There have been some that have been made. The conditions have been placed not on every inmate, obviously. They've been used, I think, about 50 times. Leonard Pelletier, which may be a name that some people here know, he was an American Indian movement political prisoner that has been proven innocent over and over again and yet still remains in federal jail. He has SAMs. He is not permitted to call people outside his immediate family or legal team. The others may well be needing a SAM. I mean, there are cases where drug dealers have given orders from prison to get rid of a competitor or an informant or something. But they have been tested, but they have not gone to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure that we want them to go to the Supreme Court. And the irony is, we were testing them. We had decided we would go forward as of about September 1st and bring a conditions lawsuit that included a challenge to these regulations which are put in place by the Bureau of Prisons, but which are enforced by the local U.S. attorney. And when I say local, I mean the way your case was prosecuted. He makes the decisions around them. And of course, when September 11th happened, we decided that if the time had been unripe September 1st, it was even less ripe after September 11th to get any kind of court to seriously consider this. So they have been challenged. The challenge has been upheld, but I think it has only been made on behalf not of political people, but on behalf of criminals who were found to have done something by way of phone, not First Amendment cases in the sense that this is.
Are the conditions that you had to sign in the Sheik's case, are those available? Or you have them on the internet somewhere? Or?
They're not, the government never ceases to amaze us, of course. They seem to have lost the actual one that I signed for the visit where they say I broke it. They can't seem to find that one. You know, we had to sign them like every 3 months, 90 days. Of course, on many occasions, the sheikh didn't sign them either because they would have to get an Arabic translator to come in and read them to him, which was sometimes too much trouble for them. But they can't seem to find this one. I don't know whether it's on the internet or not. I'll have to check with we have a website, lynnestewart.org. I'm going to find out if it can be put on there, though. Okay?
Speaking of Lynne Stewart,
On the back side of the indictment, if you go onto into the computer and look, you can see the indictment on the back side. At the very end of that, I think it's tacked onto that.
Okay.
can I just say there's T-shirts on the wall right behind you too that are being sold for sliding scale depending upon your financial ability from $10 to $20.
My son-in-law did the cartoon. It is Lynne Stewart grasping the Constitution to her ample breast. And and asking for freedom and justice.
And also, before people leave, we have a basket up here. If you could donate anything towards her legal defense and money for the T-shirts could be, I guess, put in here too.
Any more questions? Yes?
I'd like to know, how did you find out that they had taped you?
Well, the indictment clearly recited, when we got a copy of the indictment, it recited, Yes, and they did admit it. They wouldn't tell us whether they had a Title III, which of course would be approved by a judge, or whether they just did this, you know, by spiking the wall. But we had to assume it was a FISA wiretap. I think Ashcroft made a great deal out of it being the first case prosecuted under the Patriot Act, which is not true because all of the acts had taken place 2 years earlier. Right, but
If the Patriot Act is more recent, then weren't those illegal?
well, it's under this other thing, this foreign intelligence surveillance. And it's interesting you should ask, because what happens is, to challenge this wiretap, in a regular case, you get a copy of the warrant, you get a copy of all the logs of the agents, every conversation they listen to, you get a copy of the conversations themselves, and you go to a federal judge and you say, this was illegal, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, they didn't do the other thing. In a FISA, you say, this was illegal to the federal judge. He gets all the materials. You never get to even see them. You don't know what the warrant looked like. He reviews it, and you get back usually a one-line letter, the wiretap was authorized or legal or whatever. So the case, as you can see, is just like a plum pudding for a constitutional lawyer. And Michael Tiger, who is my lawyer, and he is at American University, he is that kind of a lawyer. He is it's almost, I don't want to say frothing at the mouth because it assumes a certain insanity, but he just loves this case. He just loves the legalities are so just dominant in this thing, the questions of what the government did and how they did it. I also think, and I hope, that Ashcroft sort of underestimated me. I think he sort of thought I was left behind and that he could get away with this.
Does the ACLU or the American Bar Association take?
Well, the ACLU is a strong supporter. They've co-sponsored a lot of meetings in Berkeley and Boston, all over the country. The American Bar Association has done a lot of educational work. They have put a lot of stuff on their website. They have had, you know, their streamer on their email the first week of the arrest was all the facts of the arrest and alerting lawyers and asking. Bar associations, especially the ABA, are notoriously conservative. They might think twice before supporting an indicted person, even if they see the case as having repercussions for them. So we have got the National Lawyers Guild, which is a wonderful organization, been around since the 20s, survived in the 50s. And they are 100% in my support. As a matter of fact, I am their keynote speaker at their convention in California in the next 2 weeks.
About the Vermont ACLU, because we tried to get them to co-sponsor this and they refused.
Is that right?
Yes, it is. So anybody who's a member of the ACLU, besides Sandy and I in this room, it'd be really good to let them know that you were not pleased with that.
Did they say why?
Why?
Yeah, why?
Well, I'm going to say why, because my grandson gave me the answer. When I was arrested, my 7-year-old grandson, Arthur, who loves nothing better than getting in a big chair with his favorite book, Rumpelstiltskin, and having Grandma read to him, came home, watched the television that night, went to his father and said, Dad, my son, who's also a lawyer, said, Grandma really helped the terrorists? Just a little 7-year-old. And my son said, of course not. They're lying about her. She would not do that. But that T word is very hard to erase. And we're in very, very difficult times. And organizations are worried about their funding. They're worried about the people that contribute to them. We all have concerns. We all have fears. That's why it is so wonderful to see all these wonderful people in the hallway, in the back of the room. It's really a tremendous outpouring, and it shows that I guess I am an old timer. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. So thank you. Yeah.
Maybe one last question.
Regarding our Senator Leahy, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, did
Was he helpful or hurtful in any way? Did you approach him, and if you did, could you talk about that?
I didn't. I know where he stands. He's always in the right place, usually on most issues. It seems like everybody's sort of caving in under this resolution, but I don't know where he will stand. But he was the head of the Judiciary Committee, and 12 of these FISA judges did write to him and make public the fact that they felt the act was being used unlawfully. This is a tremendous, it was on the front page of the New York Times, it was a really major deal. And that they had confidence that they went in there, they could have had a press conference, they could have done a lot of things, but that they directed it through him, knowing that his stature would bring something to this particular complaint, I think was really very, very important. We haven't exactly, you know, I hate to say it, but most politicians are not about to get on board on a case like this. This is, I can't say all, but I think many of them they have their own concerns, and we can see it every day in the way they operate. So that's probably not going to happen. But he was very good on this FISA, and we hope that we may be able to use him either by subpoena or whatever to get some more flesh about what the exact complaints were by the judges.
And I must say that I've been sort of following Senator Leahy. He's been quite good at trying to block judges that none of us really want on the bench, and I think he really needs a lot of support because he's very much under attack for that. So, anyway, I'm sure you're exhausted. You've been here all day, but I want to thank Lynne Stewart very much for coming. She's a real hero of the people, I think.
Thank you.
Everybody else here. You've seen all the lawyers. I'm so delighted to see so many lawyers here, too. So thanks very much.